we're going to move on to the HTML file. So once we've defined the CSS, the actual HTML file that we need for the application. So remember again, this application is going to be a spreadsheet. So we now need to create this cell structure that I see here in the application. So for instance, let's suppose that, if I look over here, here's the cell structure on the application. So now, if I want to create this cell structure in HTML, who can tell me what will I use? How will I create this cell structure in HTML? What would be the tag I would use?
Table.
Exactly, the table tag. So basically, now notice I start with the head stream in which I'm entering that script type equals text / JavaScript, src equals ajax.js. So my main programming is coming from the ajax.js file. But right now I have to create the HTML in which I'm going to create this structure, and of course I have a total box here which will add a total, and a fourth row here which will actually add the total. In addition to that, as you saw in our application, we have a form at the bottom over here which actually lets you select the row, the column, and those are all drop downs, and then it has a text input box and a button which says update. So if you notice right here, that's the structure we are going to create in HTML. The numbers will get populated through the JavaScript file. The form values will work through JavaScript, but this structure has to be created in HTML file. So now here's the HTML file, and as you go into the body, you notice that the body starts with a table. And remember, I told you, when you use a dot in your CSS, it comes in HTML as class. So notice here, I've created a TD, class equals col, class equals col, class equals col, class equals col, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and total. That's my table heading. Then I go down and I start with row. Now here's something that I've done, that each cell in my spreadsheet application, I'm going to give it an ID, because according to the DOM document and Ajax, we can retrieve values or store values using the ID. So if you look over here, for each cell, for the column, I'm giving an ID of N for the column, and I'm going to give an ID of R for, I'm going to go ahead and give an ID of R for the row. So you see, and because I want to create an array out of it, I'm going to start my value with 0, not by 1, even though my first column is 1. So here I start with N0, N1, N2, N3, N4. So that will be my first set of cells in N4. You see that? And then if I go further down, my second row 2 has N5, N6, N7, N8, N9. And then I go further down, and I have N10, N11, and N12, N13, and 14. Also, at the end of each row, I have a total column, which I'm going to refer to it as RT, that is row total. So you notice that at the end of the first N4, I have RT1. Then at the end of N9, I have RT2. At the end of N2, I have RT3. Now, the last row is my column totals. So you notice how the columns are coming up as CT1, CT2, column total 1, column total 2, column total 3, column total 4, column total 5, and then this last column total is called the GT. So notice that how each cell is being given an ID. My table is completed. Right below the table, I now need to go ahead and create the form. So here I create a form. Notice I'm not specifying anything about the form. Right now the form says action equals blank, because all that is going to be handled by JavaScript. But I do create I use the select column to create the drop down for you to select the rows. Its values are 1, 2, 3. I also create a second select column, which is select ID equals column, and the options are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to select the drop down. Then I say ID equals new input, ID equals new value. So notice anytime where the user is going to interact, there is an ID specified in each HTML tag. Why is that ID specified? Because in JavaScript, using the DOM document, we are going to specify using the ID. So now I have ID equals column for each drop down. For the text box where the user is going to enter the new value, the ID is new value, and then for the button, the ID is BTN. So that completes the design of our HTML page for our application. You have the table and you have the form.
Arif,
Yes.
The actual JavaScript file does the computing, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and then the XML or the AJAX XML, it sets
The XML document
is
the XML document, it just contains the data.
I see. Oh, I see yeah.
The XML document only contains the data. So we're going to pull the data from the XML document. We can alternatively send, and that's how they do it, because sometimes when you create an application, you have many different technologies. Like you could have PHP, JavaScript, .NET working together, and so you have this database. So what happens is, instead of these applications React connecting directly to the database, they just send the data to the XML document. It's more like a standard format, and then the XML document is what the database does is it reads off of the XML document. So that's what we have. So the XML document was only for this. So you notice, guys, that in this particular, and without going through the server, if I hit F12 here for my HTML document, notice this, all I did was get a structure. Why? Because so far, no programming is being done. So you look at this as an empty table. I have my column number names in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rows are 1, 2, 3. I have a total editor. I have my form below. And if I go into the form, and if I click over here right now and select row 2 and column 3, and I enter a value of 5.25 and click update, nothing happens. Why? Because I have not programmed anything with the form. Right now, all I've done is created an HTML document. And also, when I refresh, it automatically it's empty. But now, when we write the CSS, now when we write the JavaScript file, in the JavaScript file using Ajax, we will go ahead and populate and do all the computation to make this simple HTML structure turn into an interactive spreadsheet application.